I think the economy right now is very unhealthy because the consumer is very unhealthy. And the only way out, unfortunately, is a reckoning. It is going to result in more auto loan defaults. It's going to result in higher unemployment. And yet I still feel like all those things need to happen. Like part of how we get in trouble is we're always putting our finger in the dam and trying to plug holes. But eventually, like we run out of fingers. You know what I mean? And we run out of fingers. The biggest danger about this next correction is we also don't have any more plays. Like we can't print money. We can't. There has to be a reckoning before those rates can come down.
Wall Street Journal best-selling author Matt Higgins, author of the new book, Burn the Boats, and also co-founder and CEO of RSE Ventures. And I should mention a guest on Shark Tank and an executive fellow at Harvard Business School. It is so great to see you, and it's great to welcome you on the show. I am so grateful to have you here today, Matt.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Well, I'm excited too. And also, I just love following you on Twitter. And that's where we first connected. I read your book and I was telling you like how impactful it was. But I also just love following you on Twitter because I feel like you have some really good takes when it comes to the economy. A lot of the folks who come here and watch this show, they care about the macro view. So I was hoping to give you a few minutes to set the table, if you will, share with us the economic outlook for you today. What does that look like from where you stand?
I'm curious, based on people who've come on your show, and bulls versus bears, what percentage would you say?
Probably mostly bearish on the show. I don't know the ballpark. Yeah, definitely majority bearish.
All right, I'm going to take the opposite view then, just to be contrarian. No, I'm bearish too. So here's my overall view. I think sometimes I've seen over the course of my life when things take a little bit longer than expected, hopium bleeds into the gestalt, and people lose patience. And then you kind of forget that you haven't gone through it. Like look at the bank crisis, for example. Remember with, Silicon Valley Bank, right? All the other regional banks, there was contagion. They were selling off like crazy. And then we got distracted and we kind of forgot because the market ran like crazy. But it's not like the regional bank crisis has gone away. Now, the cause of the SVB was very different than the next regional bank crisis. But nonetheless, still, it's like, I won't call it a ticking time bomb, but it's a lurking monster right below the surface. So the economy, why am I bearish? 70% of the GDP is the consumer. This epic run that we are experiencing has been fueled by $5 trillion of free money that we printed in response to the pandemic. Some of it was useful. A lot of it was frivolous and wasteful. And of that $5 trillion, you still have about $500 billion of the contrails of that money in bank accounts. I don't know how people figure out this number, but that is the number that's been thrown out there. And that residual stimulus will be exhausted by the end of the year. So number one, we're out of free money. Number two, the consumer is laboring under a mountain of debt, $17 trillion, about over $1 billion of credit card debt. That is ticking away on average around 24%, unsustainable interest rates, but they've had relief because of the stimulus. Now, enter student loans. Those payments start in October, right? And the numbers are all over the place, but let's just use $300 as a proxy, right? Suddenly you're an American household that's already paying unsustainable debt, and now you have an extra $300 payment, and you're still dealing with eggs and everything else and inflation, which you were only able to handle because of your excess credit capacity and stimulus money. So I think it's pure math. Again, going back to 70% of the GDP. What I think is unfortunate is no one uses precise language at the Fed or in the government and the White House because everyone has different motives, right? But when the Fed says that their objective, and they haven't moved off of it, which is a good thing, is to bring inflation down to 2%. That's a proxy for saying we need unemployment to rise. We can't get to inflation at 2% if unemployment is 3.8%, historically low. And if you go online and you just look at different economists and how they basically correlate rising interest rates and lowering inflation to rising employment, you find that the predictions range anywhere from 5.5% to over 7%. That translates to millions of jobs. So unless for some reason we have decided that increasing interest rates doesn't stifle economic growth and therefore doesn't affect employment, unless for some reason that has completely flipped, we are going to have rising unemployment. And that means the consumer is going to be dealing with a mountain of debt at unsustainable interest rates, the lingering effects of inflation, and more people are going to be out of work. And then you turn to the housing market. I see this in every different cycle. We could have fun together and tweet out all sorts of articles with quotes that you would think were said in 2023, but they were really 2006, where you had various people who had a vested interest saying that the housing market is going to be just fine because there's not enough inventory. I love this. It's like we all suddenly had babies and like we got nowhere to live. The not enough inventory argument. We're in the not enough inventory argument where people are arguing that that's why the housing market won't correct. Here's where the housing market is being sustained. We're in a stalemate. You have no selling incentive for somebody out there because they can't trade up because they locked in an interest rate that is 3.5%. 90 something percent of everybody out there has a lower interest rate than prevailing rate. You have no buying incentive because the carrying costs are so high because you can't get debt. So we're in a stalemate. So the first thing that will happen, the first domino that will fall on housing will be selling pressure. And selling pressure comes from unemployment. So I am bearish short term, but I'm a very optimistic person. I'm optimistic that I might be wrong, that there may be new rules of the universe that are operating upon us. But for the short term, I do think it's going to be a difficult time. And lastly, the language that we use, I think, is really unfortunate. This idea that there's a soft landing coming and the banks have all reversed their positions, probably because their clients are beating them up saying, you missed this epic run in the stock market. So I actually think soft landing is a euphemism for soft peddling.
Yeah. Elaborate more on that, because that to me is so interesting. And do you think with the soft peddling, soft landing, like putting out that language, as you call it, a soft peddling, do you think that almost in a way like gets the consumer to, I don't know, take on more debt, spend, or think everything's okay?
I mean, not to be all Oliver Stoney on you, but to be a little Oliver Stone, like it is a vast conspiracy unexpressed for different reasons, but all rolls back to either the commission class or the political class. The commission class has a vested interest in keeping transactions going, M&A, consumer spending, prop up earnings, right? So people who make money on transactions, brokers, everyone, they have a vested interest in the consumer not putting that credit card away, not being nervous. And you have the political class on both ends of extreme. One extreme wants you to feel everything is fine, obviously, and the other one wants you to feel you're doomed. But that always happens, which is why I say never outsource your judgment to anyone else. A lot of times people feel like they're not equipped to make assessments. If you have Google, you're equipped to make an assessment about what's going to happen. And especially if you have common sense, then you're really equipped. Because if you have everybody laboring under all this debt and you have a lot of people who have vested interest telling you it's going to be okay, you have to take matters in your own hand and govern your own life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. Never outsource your judgment to anyone else. And sometimes like maybe some of the language sounds really intimidating, and I mean, I used to be intimidated. I don't know, maybe I'm still intimidated by it. But yeah, never. I like that mental model.
I mean, I actually thought until I had my own SPAC, which was not the best decision I made, just because what a tortured experience. But I learned about the markets a lot, which was great. And I thought because everyone has access to the same information generally, the wisdom of crowds would prevail. And there wouldn't be information asymmetry or insight asymmetry. But the reality is there's a lot of momentum out there in the markets to create transactions to keep the whole thing going. And I mean, not to be naive, but I was actually surprised by how much everyone has an interest in just creating transactions, creating noise so that everyone can get the residual fee. And so it's really important that you do not become overly deferential to expertise.
Yeah. Again, another great lesson. Let me ask you this. Just the markets to me have been so perplexing this year because I mean, beginning of the year, it was like, okay, there's this anticipation of a recession. It was kind of like the consensus. And then we just had the markets rise. I want to get your take. Maybe we can do both public. We can also do private markets as well. Just maybe more of the valuations. What is kind of your assessment there?
I mean, the valuations have been crazy. I predicted this would happen, but I can't recall why. To be honest, I think it was mostly a contrarian play because conventional wisdom all said 2023 is going to be a terrible year for the market. So I went heavy long in a number of different areas, but mostly around strong tailwind convictions. Like I went hard at Eli Lilly, because I thought, Mounjaro and this whole class of drugs was going to transform the world. And I thought it wouldn't be correlated. I went hard at NVIDIA very early because I just figured they're the plumbing and the infrastructure. So I went long on very specific bets, but I don't have a great explanation why valuations were bid up so high. It doesn't really make a ton of sense, especially when treasuries are throwing off 5%. But
yeah,
regardless of why it happened, I know it's coming to an end.
Yeah. On this whole notion of the Fed has to, kill inflation, which we kind of saw creep back up again. And in doing so, you're going to have to increase unemployment. It's a bit of a paradox here. So how do you think that one plays out? Like, who do you think gets hurt? Because it feels like, I don't know. I've had a conversation on this show. I had Dr. Peter Atwater talk about the K-shaped recovery. And I had another guest bring this up. I want to say it was Peter Cicchini on that episode. I don't recall. I have to go check. Where there's a certain portion of the population is doing quite well. Like, you can see more of the luxury stocks, if you will, going up. Others not doing so well. So that kind of divergence. Do you have any sort of thoughts on when unemployment, if that rises, who gets hurt? Like, what are the jobs that get impacted from your view?
And I think to make it simple too, for anyone out there who, has a life and doesn't want to spend all day trying to decipher these conflicting signals, like, introducing common sense, think about the purpose of raising interest rates. It's very simple because it's the same on the macro as it is on the micro. When interest rates rise for your mortgage, you're no longer incentivized to invest in another house, right? It changes your behavior on a personal level, saying, hey, the carrying cost of that house is now double what it was 2 years ago. I'm going to wait. If you're a business and suddenly the cost of capital is very high for you to borrow the build out so you can take your first store and build the second store, right? But now you got to pay 8%, from the regional bank. You're going to wait because you're saying, I can't get a sufficient enough return on that money because a build out is going to take me 9 months. And so I'm going to stop. That's all it is. The Fed is trying to stop the investment because the investment is the thing that is bidding up inflation, right? All spending money, we're divorced from reality. And so let's talk about, is it a worthwhile objective to try to bring inflation down to 2%? I'm surprised there hasn't been more political pressure to get the Fed to retreat. It might come. It's happening in other parts of the world. So that eventually you might hear, who made that rule? Why does it have to be 2%? Let's just stop at 3%. I think at the end of the day, who gets hurt by I'd rather say who gets hurt by free money, who gets hurt by assets being bid up. I think investors get hurt because you end up having crappy companies go public. You end up having unsustainable businesses, attract silly valuations. And then the retail investor doesn't have the insights necessarily is the one who gets hurt. So I think at the end of the day, I think it's very unhealthy when you have an environment of free money that lowers the risk. You create lots of moral hazard where people can back things based on the greater fool theory. It doesn't matter. Take this company public and then, I'll take the money and run. So I think the objective of health is a worthwhile objective. So what's healthy? I do think 2% inflation is healthy. I think runaway inflation ultimately ends up hurting the middle class because the way they handle it is by using debt. And then as we see, as free money creates this cycle where the Fed pushes back and then interest rates go up, and now they're stuck with a mountain of debt that they can't service. So I think the economy right now is very unhealthy because the consumer is very unhealthy. And the only way out, unfortunately, is a reckoning. It is going to result in more auto loan defaults. It's going to result in higher unemployment. And yet I still feel like all those things need to happen. Like, part of how we get in trouble is we're always putting our finger in the dam and trying to plug holes. But eventually, we run out of fingers. You know what I mean? And we run out of fingers. The biggest danger about this next correction is we also don't have any more plays. We can't print money. We can't. There has to be a reckoning before those rates can come down. Yeah.
Let me ask you this. What are you doing to prepare? Are you doing anything to prepare for this scenario that you can share?
Yeah. I mean, I got rid of a lot of assets that I feel like I didn't need. I increased my amount of cash, basically. I increased my amount of credit capacity in case I needed it. I mean, I behave like I grew up in Queens and would go to housing court on the eve of being evicted. I'd come home to a notice from Con Edison saying our power was going to be shut off. I still have a lot of that trauma in the back of my mind, and I do not like when I feel unsafe, when I feel over levered, and cash makes me feel stable. So there's that. But then on the business front, which is why I have such visibility into what happens when rates increase, right? When you're running a business, now you can't get debt because now the banks are totally nervous and they're waiting for the other shoe to drop. They don't want more exposure. You have all these businesses that were venture funded that used to get debt from Silicon Valley Bank that was collateralized by the equity of the company. And then they would give a loan to the CEO so they could buy a house collateralized by that same equity. you had double down exposure to risk, like all that's over. And then you have a company now saying, okay, I'll get equity. But investors are like, I'm not paying on a multiple top line anymore. I'm on profitability. You have all these businesses that were built on growth that can't get equity anymore. So I'm watching the effects of everyone waiting for the other shoe to drop, stop investment, which eventually shows up in unemployment. So as a person, what I'm doing is battening down the hatches. And as an investor who oversees a portfolio of companies, I'm telling them extend runway. It's like obvious, but like make the decisions now while you can before you're forced to. And a lot of them are retrenching, stopping growth. They are implementing layoffs. And again, on the home front, I'm preserving cash.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. It's so grim. I'm still optimistic.
No, I was going to ask you. Okay, wait.
Yeah, like, oh boy.
You're right.
I'm a bullish long-term. I'm just not a
bull
bullshit.
long-term, but bearish right now. Okay, to that point though, what is it that makes you bullish longer term?
I think I'm bullish for a couple of reasons. It's kind of counterintuitive. A lot of innovation and growth and creativity is being stymied because of the paralysis. Everyone is in a waiting period. It's interesting. Like the stock market ran up and would tell one story, but underneath that, every CEO, every certainly small business owner, Americans, like we're all know that the other shoe is going to drop, but then it never comes, right? So it feels like the recession is 6 months late. I'm bullish because I think once that actually starts, then certainty is our friend, right? Even if certainty is a little bit gloomy, if we can know what we can expect, then people can plan for it. So I actually think this paralysis is the worst possible thing for the economy, for psychology, for investment. So I'm optimistic because it's coming. Like I could see that the end of sustainability is coming with the introduction of, student loan debt and everything else. I could see consumers starting to make choices across my portfolio starting. And so I think the end is near in terms of now the reckoning begins. And then the second part why I'm really optimistic we can get into that is AI. The AI revolution is breathtaking, and I don't even think it's priced in. I think that the most of the focus has been on fear mongering. We're moving away from that, though. I think that was like 6 months ago. Now we're moving away from that, but it's mostly focused on the big players, Microsoft, Azure, NVIDIA, now ARM. But it's mostly a buzzword AI and a few monster companies, how they're doing it. But below the surface, there is breathtaking innovation happening that will change everybody's life. And then there's also a whole new class of entrepreneurs that are being created. I think this will be the greatest period of wealth creation. Maybe not period, the greatest tool or catalyst of wealth creation in our lifetime.
Wow. The greatest tool and catalyst of wealth creation in our lifetime. Are you investing in AI companies? How do you assess? What do you like? What are you trying to avoid in this space?
I'll tell you my behavior. Again, counterintuitive. My behavior is very tactical and not very strategic, because what AI does is allow you to address problems that you previously thought were unaddressable or unsolvable. And so if you only focus on problems that you're cognizant of in your company, you're not going to let your mind be expansive enough to really take advantage of it. So, for example, H&R Block, case study, they have a problem. People will show up, 2 days before their taxes are due with shoe boxes of documents, like, here, do my taxes. And then of course, like, how do we make sense of all this stuff? And like, whatever. They partnered with Microsoft to go ahead and find a way to analyze every type of form so that it immediately can populate where that form needs to go. And they did something that they had once predicted would take, like a decade and like 4 months or something. I'm generalizing. Here's why tactics are so important as a leader of a company or a business. You can't imagine what AI can do for you. So the best way to figure it out is to look at the tools that are being created at the most granular level. Be like, oh, I didn't know I could do that. So anyone out there is trying to make sense who's a content creator, I'll make this more specific. There's a tool out there. If you follow me on Twitter, I'll post a thread on this that enables you to take any video you've created, and let's say you're an English speaker, and deliver that video in Mandarin and have your mouth move as with the right tones and inflections and laugh that you look like a native speaker. I did not know that existed until 3 days ago, right? So like, that's just a small tool. There are so many tools. On a big picture level, there are stroke victims in Wales, of which there are 70,000 people in Wales who have had a stroke and lost mobility. They're using AI to go ahead and mimic the electrical signals that are sent from your working leg and replicate them on your leg that had lost mobility, enabling you to walk again using AI. So like, that's what I'm saying. As a leader, as a person, you really want to get very tactical and see what's being built to solve problems, because that'll stimulate your mind. But like, I didn't even know one could even address that problem.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's an exciting time for sure. Matt, I do want to bring up your book. And for the folks watching and listening, it's a must read. I messaged you to like how surprised I was reading it. It was like truly a gem. And emotional. It made me choke up at times. And when we were just discussing the economy and how you're preparing, you were even just mentioning like the importance of cash to you, like for security. Growing up in Queens, and you were mentioning getting the Con Edison notes. Can you take us back to that time? Because I know those were formidable years for you as a young person. You dropped out of high school. Take us back to that time in your life.
Yeah. So I grew up in Queens, New York, and I was the product of a single mother, and we were desperately poor, no other way to put it. And growing up in a little shoebox apartment, 4 rotten boys. And my mother was really smart, but never had an education. She was the product of horrific abuse. The full extent I didn't know until she had passed away. But so I'm a little boy, I'm 9 years old, and I take on the hero child identity. My job is to try to, rescue mom and also rescue myself. And so I was selling flowers on street corners. I was that little kid who would knock on your window, and try to guilt you into buying flowers for your wife on a holiday or whatever, and, scraping gum under tables at McDonald's. So a very tortured existence, but also a sense that just because I was born here doesn't mean I'm destined to stay here, and feeling like there was something bigger that life had in store for me. So I went through a phases that anyone listening to this who has either grown up in dysfunction or finds himself in a really hard situation can relate to. It's the phase where you fantasize about somebody rescuing you, hoping that somebody's going to come along. Then that never materializes. The cavalry never comes. And then you go through a disillusionment phase, like, why doesn't anybody care? And the depression phase, which I went through. And then I went through the defiant phase, and I had an epic conversation with my mother when I was very young. She felt very persecuted and victimized by the world. And I was like, you know what? I don't want to believe that the world operates this way. So from now on, I'm going to decide that things don't happen to me. I happen to things. And I remember saying, well, that's really easy for a kid to say. You're naive. And, and I was like, all right, well, that's my worldview going forward. And I came up with a hack. And this is my burn the boats moment, which is why I wrote the book, right? I was making $3.75 an hour at McDonald's, $5 an hour in Delhi. I'm like, this is not going to sustain us. And my mother is deteriorating by the day. And I came up with an idea spurred by her. She had a GED as an adult, and she went to college with it. I used to go to classes with her. And I was like, what if I dropped out of high school now, got my GED, and went to college? Technically, every good college, as long as you did well enough on the GED, you could convert that to a GP and you can go to college. It's a hack that people would never think to use deliberately. GED is usually like last resort, right? And so when I floated that all to teachers and guidance counselors, everyone was like, you're absolutely crazy. And you're going to be branded a loser for the rest of your life. You're going to ruin your life. And I held on to that with everything I could. Here's where the burn the boats comes in, though. All that pressure from conventional wisdom is so much pressure on you when you know you're right. Like, this is right for me. You have no visibility into my dirty little apartment and my mother wasting away. You do not know what is right for me because I've concealed it from you. Your advice is corrupted because you don't have a window. But officialdom wants you to follow the gravitational pull of what they've decided works for everybody else. But I was an edge case. And when you're an edge case, system's not designed for you. So in order to burn the boats and make sure I had no retreat, I failed every single class for 2 years straight, except for typing. And so that I would have no option to retreat, sat in Mrs. Vega's homeroom with the kids with the beepers, dealing drugs, being entrepreneurs back then. And I dropped out of high school, and I did it. And within 1 year, I went from the kid that some teachers were derisive, some felt bad. I went from that look to showing up at my prom as president of the debate team with a 3.5 at Queens College with a look of begrudging respect. That was my burn the boats moment. So we can get into it, but I experienced something and witnessed many things at the same time when I was 16. Powerlessness, apathy, what happens when you take control, trusting your instincts, and then giving yourself no retreat. The power of that. And all my life, I'm like, I've been replicating that without the desperation of saving your mom. I've been replicating it, trying to reduce it, the cortisol that comes with it, and saying, can you replicate that confidence and conviction without having to be in a crisis? And so I want to write a book of what are the metaphorical boats that hold us back and beckon us to retreat, and try to knock them down one by one. Anxiety, imposter syndrome, shame, whatever it is. And that was the purpose of my book.
Yeah, it was incredible. I want to read a line from it because when you, just going back to high school, when you were turning in your textbooks after you dropped out, you went into Mr. Rosenthal's science class and he said, "Higgins, what a waste." And as you were leaving, he said, "I'll see you at McDonald's." And you, as you walked out, said, "If you see me at McDonald's, it's because I'll own it. You'll own the McDonald's." Like that was like a moment for you. That was the burn the boats. So I guess
that gives me chill. By the way,
yeah.
You say that. First, I feel bad for Mr. Rosenthal. I'm like, I don't mean to besmirch your good name. And then I actually got chills thinking that, you get taken back in time. It actually makes me almost want to pass out. Like, woof, that was so crazy. Hard moment. Yeah.
But I guess my question too is, we have these kind of boats that hold us back, these metaphorical boats. Once you burn the first one and you realize, okay, I guess it worked, you survived. Does it give you the conviction or the confidence to do the next one, like taking those steps?
Right. We have a form of muscle memory in this area, which is the confidence to believe that things will just work out. It's really more or less that things will work out. I will figure it out, even though I don't know what figuring it out looks like. And the burn the boats formula is to put yourself in positions for which you don't have all the answers and to lower the bar for taking action, right? What I find when I find an entrepreneur has been stunted and they're paralyzed by fear, it's because they raise the bar on themselves inadvertently, thinking like, well, I need to know where my funding is going to come from. They have to have a million things sort of figured out. And when I teach at Harvard Business School, it's amazing. When I invite the lecturers to say, what do you want to share with the younger version of yourself? You have 100 future leaders of America sitting here, right, all over the world. What's the one message you want to leave? You know what's crazy? There's a show, Family Feud, when it's like, survey says, and it's like 90% of the entrepreneurs deliver the same message. I wish I could tell my younger self, trust yourself that you'll just figure it out. And I'm like, it's always the same without any prep. And so I guess the purpose of the book and your point about does it get easier is like, it absolutely gets easier, but it never gets easy. And if it gets easy, then you're not really trying. It's my point about imposter syndrome. You have to come to look at imposter syndrome as a feedback loop, that you're doing uncomfortable things because your mind has no neural pathways to traverse. You've never done it before. And so it's like it's a reflexive defensive response when you feel anxiety syndrome. We interpret that as meaning I must not belong here. And it's your brain saying like, no, I've never been here before. I don't have the tools to navigate this. So it absolutely gets easier. And I think the joy of living is in the striving. It's in the perpetual pursuit. Anyone hearing this who's ever run a marathon knows what I'm talking about. You run the race and you're like, God, I'm so glad that's over. And then 2 hours later, I was like, I'm so sad that's over.
Yeah, it's the journey to the marathon. It's the training.
Yeah. Oh, I like the chafing and I like the nails that would fall off and the fact that my spouse or partner thought it was disgusting. And I like the goose in my pocket that I forgot to take out and went through the laundry. I liked it all. I liked the pain. And so the premise of my book, now we're going to go multi-level premise, is that it's not so much that you don't want a backup plan. It's more that we already have the backup plan hardwired into our factory settings. When I ask people simply 4 questions, I always go through when I process risk before I go through a really hard thing. I say, number one, I embrace my inner catastrophizer. What's the worst that's going to happen if I do this, right? I let my crazy mind run wild and it invents all sorts of horrific things, losing my reputation, my money, everything. And then number 2, I said, okay, if that were to happen, what's my plan B? What would I do? And within a nanosecond, everybody, you would have it, I have it. What would you do if those bad things were to happen? We already have our backup plan. Mine is hanging on the wall in this fancy law degree that I never used once in my life because it sounds like a death sentence, but I would use it. No disrespect to anyone else. For me, I'd go be alert. Number 3, what's the probability the worst thing is going to happen? Very low because we are inventive, but we're usually wrong in anticipating what goes wrong. And then 4, what's my why? What would I do to achieve this? For me, this book is the most important thing I've ever done in my life professionally. The idea that I wake up to DMs from somebody saying like, oh, your book helped me cross the threshold from once in my life. I feel like somebody sees what I'm capable of. Like what I wouldn't give, what I wouldn't suffer to get that DM, I can't even articulate. So the point of my book, you have your backup plan hardwired into your factory settings. And science shows that merely contemplating a plan B while you're pursuing plan A, the energy leakage devoted to hedging is enough to ensure you'll never achieve breakout success. So sequence matters. If you go through that 4-step process before you commit, you will stop looking over your shoulder. That was a long answer to the question.
That was a great answer to that question. A lot of mental models in there too, of like, it gets easier, but never easy. I really like that one.
I like that too. I made that up just for you.
I like another one you wrote down in your book, like the most important conversations you have are the ones you have with yourself. I like that one as well.
We never talk about the inner dialogue. Now, there are some people, like my wife is amazing, Sarah, perfectly self-possessed. And like, she's like, what inner voice? I'm like, damn you. It doesn't undermine you when you're about to do something big. And so a small fragment of the population doesn't have it. For the rest of us, we need to retrain the voice in our head to be an ally and not an enemy. And it's a conscious effort. And it's something we should all collectively talk about and acknowledge. There's no shame in the fact that for whatever reason, there's a malevolent superego authority that is waging battle inside you and undermines you, and you can retrain that voice in your head to be a friend.
Yeah. Okay. So also reading the book, I learned a lot about you. And like, you have not had a linear career path by any means. You've done a lot of different, various things. What a fascinating career. Going from like a cub reporter, to doing comms in New York City to working for the Jets. Can you take us through? Okay, just take us through that journey as well. And
yeah,
to be an investor, to be on Shark Tank, Harvard, all of those amazing things.
So, I mean, I could tie it all together because one of the problems I've had, something I've debated, right? When you manifest in the world in so many different ways, it's hard for people to process you. It actually makes you less effective getting a message out. So if you looked at yourself as a product, they're like, you represent too many things, but like, whatever, it's my life. But there is a method to the madness. And the method is, what was my ultimate objective? Where was I trying to get to? I was trying to get to a place of autonomy because I witnessed at 16 what happens when you don't have autonomy. You don't have the ability to save the people you love. You don't have the ability to make choices that serve your own dreams, right? You so many bad things happen the less autonomy you have. My whole life has been pursuit of maximal autonomy. That's number one. Number two, I love to create. I love to create from nothing. It's the thing that brings me joy. When I could spot a distant point on the horizon and I have to make several attenuated moves to get there that almost seem impossible to put all of them together, and then I arrive, it feels like I'm hacking into the codes, or I'm touching the face of God, like, oh, there is an order to this, and I could discern it because that was so attenuated. And so when you look at my career, it is the net result of me being highly intentional and always saying to myself, okay, what can I do now that I've accomplished this that brings me closer to my ultimate ambition of having autonomy and building companies, right? So if you look at the job, I used to work in government. I was the press secretary of the mayor of New York.
The youngest too. The youngest.
Yeah, the youngest.
Yeah.
I was 26 and turned 27 when I was press secretary. Oversaw the worst terrorist attack in history, the rebuilding of it as chief operating officer, right? And then I went to sports. People are like, oh, you, what does sports have to do with it? It's all about definitions. My job was in the government when I oversaw the redevelopment as COO, but my job was about bringing together disparate communities in the most complicated redevelopment project in the history of the world, right? The Jets needed somebody to help them build a stadium. So if you zoom out and you say, oh, that's essentially the same underlying skill sets, reconciling different communities, get buy-in from the government, et cetera, complicated building projects. So I think one of the things that people do is their careers get stunted because they put themselves in a box and they zoom in instead of zooming out. Imagine I had said to myself, well, I'm a government worker now. I mean, I have to always work in government. One day I hope to be deputy mayor, instead I was like, I'm not a government worker. I'm a builder and I'm going to go build wherever I want. And then when I did the Jets, right? Okay, I did build, I created the stadium, but I was getting seduced by the trappings of a job that was everybody's dream job of mine. Like, I like sports, but it's never been my dream to run a team. I ended up running 2 sports teams, but my dream was to build. So I leveraged that to go ahead and form a partnership with Steve Ross, the owner of the Dolphins, to oversee his team, but then to create RSE Ventures. And fast forward, we've invested over $1 billion, in amazing consumer brands. And this was my ultimate destination. But my ultimate destination was to use the authority that I've accumulated from doing all these disparate things with this simple formula of burn the boats and pull back the curtain to inspire somebody else, saying, you can do it. I got here not because I was born in third base, because I lived in Connecticut and went to Harvard. I got here in spite of the fact I grew up in hellish conditions, carried a lot of anxiety, got divorced, had my life fall apart, have one testicle because I have testicular cancer. You know what I mean? All the issues and the deficiencies, whatever, I got here in spite of. And hopefully I'm using the authority of all those career moves. People saying, wow, how'd you get to Harvard? How'd you get to here? Tying it together with one narrative and making somebody believe the die is not cast. You know, like, oh, Matt, because I started feeling alienated by how I would show up in the world. I walk into a room of GED students and I got the nice clothes, white male, 48. You're like, oh, you probably, were born on third base. And I was like, oh, that's not me. And then I was like, oh, I'm going to tell you what it's all about. Greatest joy I get is when somebody crosses the divide of this balkanized world where we're all supposed to be in our corners. We have nothing to teach each other. And they're from a different demographic, or they're a woman or Black grandmother. This actually happens. We talk all the time. And the book touched them and we meet each other somewhere at the intersection in this book. To me, it's like amazing. And so it was a big motivation for like, oh, I want to pull back the curtain. This is not how I want to show up in the world.
Yeah. A couple questions. Do you think that the system, like I'm thinking like maybe our education system, I'd love to hear your thoughts there. It couldn't properly like serve someone like you. Maybe, I wonder if like, maybe it's like you need to equip more young people with these frameworks or mental models, or I don't know. I just would be curious to hear your thoughts.
I don't think it's set up. I don't know the solution, but that's why I've been using language of edge case, because then it seems so obvious. Of course. So just to look at my life, at the moment that I was going through high school, I have an unnatural relationship with my mother, which a lot of people are put in the place of caregivers because their parents are human. They may have alcoholism. They're human, right? Just because you have the right to have a baby doesn't suddenly make you equipped to raise one, right? So my mother didn't have the physical skills or the emotional healing, to be able to do it. So now I'm parentified. So now I have the job of saving a parent, and I'm working at a deli overnight, thinking about getting jumped on the way home, carrying a butterfly knife. I don't sleep, and I hate my life, and I sleep on a dog mattress on the floor in a roach motel. You know what I mean? And I'm a kid. I'm concealing it all with Jordache jeans, dating myself. So like, why am I going to care about English 101? And so what the system is not designed to do is to identify that kid and to create bespoke solutions that work within the context. What's so strange is when we become adults, we've become so much more enlightened. If somebody has a disability, we make accommodations, right? Everything's about accommodations. But as a child, we make no accommodations. And we don't say like, for me, if somebody had just done not homeschooling, remote learning, I could pass anything. I mean, I went to law school. I did 4 years a night at Fordham Law, and I was on law review. So I was on the top of the class, right? Like I could have done it. So when I was debating with my guidance college teachers, I was like, you think fucking algebra is going to matter? Sorry to curse, but you think it's going to matter? Like when I'm living in this condition, you know what I mean? And so the system is not designed to meet a student where they are, the edge cases. And there's crazy statistics about how many kids in a New York City public school system are having poverty, but like we don't design solutions that work with them. So if there was one change I could make, it would be somehow to instill that paradigm of like, let's act like we were running a company, and we would look at each employee and figure out their circumstances and how to get the most out of them and try to create some type of systems, but we don't take that approach in a school system that has 1.1 million people.
Yeah. Reading the book too, like I told you, like how emotional, it wasn't what I expected. Like reading the cover, Burn the Boats. Like I was just thinking, the book is like an inside joke, like pagan symbol, burn the boats. It's like, it's meant to just the opposite of what you expect. And it was very raw. And I just wanted to hear from you, like, sharing so much of this and I don't know if you shared much of this before, in your life, and just like talk to me about that process and opening up. And I just want to hear more on that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm always very intentional. I had not shared it publicly because frankly, there would have been no point, right? Like I'm always intentional with what I do. And so the point of sharing in the book, and this was the delicate balance. The worst thing anybody could say to me is that this book is an autobiography. It's like, it's not meant to be an autobiography. I'm sharing the pain and the grief to credentialize myself, to imbue my journey with authority so that you can't see yourself as different or, because that's what would happen otherwise. If, God bless him, Steve Schwartzman writes a book, you're going to be like, I mean, that's great, but geez, you're Steve Schwartzman, right? Like, I wanted to write it so that you could meet me somewhere at an intersection and be like, oh, we are the same, right? And so the sharing of the details, which there's many pages in the book I have never read again. I cannot read them. I cannot read the part about my mother dying. I cannot read about the divorce. Like, there's things I don't want to put in there, but I put in there because I know that I would break down the barrier. And the book is not, I didn't write a book. I'm engineering an outcome. I'm engineering an outcome that somebody feels seen and supported who doesn't have that in their life right now, who feels like the die is cast and can realize that, oh, Matt got there in spite of, I can get there in spite of too. And so it was a very calculated, intention, but not that it was hard to do, because it was not hard to do because I decided I would do it. It's hard for me to process it because the pain of the things in there are very still raw to me. Mm-hmm. I deliberately do not try to heal over some of the trauma because I think within the trauma resides the empathy to do it in the first place. Like, if I decided to do years and years of therapy, I'd probably emerge being perfectly well adjusted, but I would lose a lot of the empathy. But instead, I write scholarships for single mothers, and it's breathtaking. I'm in a room full of LeBron James because it's fresh to me about how hard it was for my mother to do what she did, right? So it's a long way of saying to you, I hadn't shared it before because there was no point. There became a point in writing the book because I was engineering an outcome. And I want to make sure the reader felt like they couldn't separate themselves from Matt. They couldn't rationalize that you did it because either you're a white male or, you know what I mean? Like, I really wanted to lower myself.
I'm sure you probably have gotten a lot of reaction to and positive reactions to it for being just so open, just extreme, really open. And I think that makes the reader appreciate the journey too. I am curious though, as an investor and putting yourself out there too, has it, changed you in any way of how you look at entrepreneurs or evaluating entrepreneurs or kind of finding, those who can burn the boats, if you will, you kind of find these skill sets within someone that might not appear necessarily on paper.
It's actually been a very effective tool because from an investment landscape, I preach about how the most important skills I look for in the founder are this blend of confidence and humility, because those will ensure that they make the course corrections along the way. They're confident enough to look within, and they have the humility to acknowledge that they're not perfect, and therefore they will make the course corrections before they're imposed upon them. Every single business I have is a product of multiple iterations and pivots. And those who don't make it, it's because there was one common thread at the top of the company. The founder lacked self-awareness. And I get asked this as a leader, Matt, you talk about self-awareness, but how do you perpetuate that gobbledygook? You know what I mean? How do you create cultures of self-awareness? And I was like, you know how you do it? You model vulnerability at the top. You share something slightly uncomfortable, a bit unsafe, maybe tad cringy. And you show people that nothing happened. If anything, good things happen. One of my favorite stories in the book is about Rex Ryan. Uh-huh. Rex Ryan, the coach of the NFL, who I helped him manage through this crisis, which now seems so quaint with OnlyFans and everything we have in our world. But back then, Rex had a personal predilection for feet. He loved his wife's feet, not just any feet, but his wife of many decades of marriage, 30 years. Somehow this was a scandal because there were some funny, innocuous, tawdry videos that got out there. Anyway, I had to help Rex manage through this. Front page of the Post, CNN, all over the world, right? And we're under siege. And I remember I walk into Rex Ryan's office, knock on the door, hey, Rex. And he's like, come in. And he's kneeling. And I was like, sorry, I didn't know you prayed. And he goes, I do now, man. And in that conversation, Rex is devastated. What am I going to do? In my life, this, that, and the other. He's like, Rex, I'm going to get you a 10-book deal. He's like, what are you talking about? I was like, you know how admirable it is that a man has been married for 30 years, is so drawn to his wife's feet that he makes videos about it. He's cracking up. I was like, Rex, we're going to go on Oprah together. And he's laughing. Anyway, long story short, we navigate that crisis together, right? You know what happens after the crisis? The locker room is drawn to him like the strength of a magnet that's never been created before. They are so connected once the story comes out because they saw that Rex was a human. He owned it. He was authentic. He had idiosyncrasies. A lot of these guys come from dysfunctional backgrounds and are laboring with so much pain and yet still excelling in spite of, right? And so Rex became this powerful force, and that event was a turning point. And so my point to leaders and how this is maybe a better investor, back to your question, is that this book is one overarching exercise in modeling vulnerability, and nothing happened because nobody cares, because we're all dealing with our own crap. And so when you have the strength and confidence to share it, you actually get other people to share it too and know they're safe. So what I love about the book now it's like, all right, if you thought I was full of shit before, I definitely shared it, and enables me to hold people accountable to cultivate their self-awareness, which makes them better leaders.
Yeah. It's like you own it in a way.
Yeah, just own it. Right. If I were to get another tattoo, and I just got one, by the way, I haven't revealed it yet. I just got it 2 days ago, and I'm going to reveal it.
Oh, it's like a secret tattoo.
It is a secret tattoo.
Where is it?
I'm not even. Where do you think? No, it's. I'm doing a whole thing about it, but I'm so excited. But if I had another one, it would be just own it. Like just own it. Just own it already.
Yeah, I do. I remember the Rex Ryan story because wouldn't he like see you afterward? Like, I forgot what he said.
Right. He sees me afterwards. He goes, "There's Oprah."
That's it. That was it. I was trying to like, what was it? There's Oprah.
You know what's nice too? What he says to me, more importantly than the funny part of the story, is that when we did an interview for the book, and I'm always like wondering, are you going to let me share it? I'm so grateful that other people, some didn't, some did, let me share things in the book that were on the same vein as mine. And Rex said, "You showed up when I needed you. You were there for me. You know, you never flinched. And I am good. If there's a train coming and we can't divert it, we can't derail it, I'm going to hold your hand. We're going to walk in front of it together." So, with Rex, I had that nice reminder to show up for people in their darkest moments.
Yeah. I have to say there are so many different anecdotes throughout the book and so many great stories and moments. And
can I tell you, though, the best part that's happened with the book so far, though, is I do wake up to these DMs, but about somebody who read the book and felt empowered to cross the threshold and commit to their plan A, right? And those are amazing, and they sustain my unrelenting effort, right? I get an email from a message from a woman named Isabella, and she's an investment banker. And this is not long after the book came out, like maybe a month and a half later. And she goes, "I just want you to know, I read your book 3 weeks ago, and I gave notice this morning." Now, this always takes my breath away. This happens a lot. "I quit today," and I was like, "Oh, okay." She's like, "I have a dream, and I've been working on it, and your book gave me the courage to go after it, and now I know what I need to do." Like, very self-possessed. And, I wish her the best. And we go back and forth. She circles back 3 months later, and she's like, "Hey, I'm about to launch my company that I launched after I read your book. Can I send you the deck?" I was like, "Absolutely." I look at the deck. Now I see hundreds, thousands of deals on my life. So there are little patterns that I look for. And I'm going through the deck, and I'm like, "Oh, that's interesting." Two other co-founders she recruited, one's from Stanford, one's from NYU, badass women, like all the kind of co-founders I'd be recruiting if I was doing this idea. Then I look at the idea, oh, it's a pretty big TAM, on and on and on. All the signals of, so this is somebody who should have been doing this thing. We form a dynamic. And I said, "Tell me the story of the book." She goes, "I've been wanting to do this." And every time I would talk to people about it, they would say something like, "Oh, but Isabella, what do you know about this?" Or they would undermine it. I couldn't quite get the conviction. And I was talking to my mom, who I'm very close to, and she's an immigrant from Colombia. And she was like, "Baby, I don't have the answers for you. I don't know, but I think this book might have the answers." She gives her the book, and the book is what sets into motion. Fast forward, I'm now her first investor, and we're out there raising $750,000. She's going to launch this company, and we're going to share the story with the world. Like, it is the greatest ROI of anything I've ever done. Like, I who wouldn't live for that experience? And so that's been happening to me every day in different forms, which is amazing.
I love that. Wow, that's awesome.
Isn't that awesome? Like,
that's such a great. Well, I got chills talking about that. That's a great story. I get all
I tell the story, and I'm like, oh, Isabella, and then all these different people kind of going for it.
I love
and
it.
it doesn't really matter how it works out. It just matters that somebody is finally pursuing what they felt they were put on this earth to pursue.
Well, I have to say, Matt, I've really enjoyed this conversation, everything from talking about the economy to the book and all of these amazing lessons. And I'm just grateful for you taking the time today. I want to give you a moment. If you want to share any parting thoughts with the folks, let them know, obviously, where they can follow you on social, pick up the book, just anything that you want to plug, and any parting thoughts. Yeah.
I would just want to leave with the thought that the book is not what it sounds like. Burn the boats. It's an inside joke. I'm trying to appropriate a phrase that goes back to the beginning of recorded history that's imbued with a lot of authority, and take it on behalf of the angst-ridden, anxiety-laden, the people for whom risk-taking doesn't come naturally, because we are all wanters and risk seekers because we understand that on the other side of risk is reward. So when you use language that describes yourself as I'm not a risk taker, that language was installed in you, right? We all have big dreams. And so this book is an attempt to knock down all your objections over the course of 50 different case studies. My best friend Scarlett Johansson and like Rex Ryan stories to an incredible paraplegic Olympian that I met in Canada who's building her own business, right? It's meant to hold up a mirror to whatever you have inside you and validate your intuition and suspicion. I always say, I'm never the genesis. The book is just a catalyst, right? I didn't install the thought in you. Not a single person was like, Matt, I didn't have a dream until I read your book. It was like, oh, now I feel seen. You held up a mirror. So the book is meant to hold up a mirror to you. When the only thing I ask in return is if you DM me and tell me how it impacted you. Every day I have to, my book is my accountability partner because every day I'm like, oh God, so cringy. And it's also exhausting. And it also takes everything out of me. And then I get a DM and I'm like, oh, what would I do not to reach one more Isabella? So if you let me know that it did anything for you, it gets me doing it more. So I just would ask anybody listening right now, after you read it, just send me a DM on LinkedIn or Instagram. I read every single one of them. Second thing is it's really important for me to get this book in libraries anywhere in the country. So if you have a library, I will pay for the copy to be sent. You just need to ask somebody for a name and an address and I'll take care of the rest. But I love the idea of thinking about little Matt who didn't have money to buy this book, being able to go to a library. And there's no efficient way to get it to libraries. So I invite you to do that.
I love that. Well, Matt Higgins, Wall Street Journal best-selling author of Burn the Boats and CEO and co-founder of RSE Ventures. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time and your ideas. I really appreciate you coming on, and I would love to have you back on again soon. Thank you again, Matt.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much. This is an awesome show. Keep doing what you're doing. Talk to you soon.
Thank you. Thanks.